Why do smart people make irrational decisions with money? And what can we learn from their mistakes to build lasting wealth and happiness? You can purchase Morgan Housel's eye-opening book, The Psychology of Money, through the link in the video description below. Now, let's explore the fascinating psychological principles that govern our relationship with money and how understanding them can transform your financial life. No one's crazy. Understanding financial behavior. Money decisions often look crazy to outside observers, but they make perfect sense when viewed through the lens of each person's unique experiences. Housel begins by explaining that our relationship with money isn't primarily mathematical or even logical. It's deeply personal and shaped by our individual histories. Someone who grew up during the Great Depression might save obsessively and avoid stocks entirely, while someone who came of age during the 1990s tech boom might view aggressive investing as the only path to wealth. Neither is crazy. They're simply responding to the financial worlds they've experienced firsthand. This insight fundamentally changes how we should view financial advice. The notion of universal best practices with money falls apart when we recognize that our financial behaviors are shaped by our personal histories, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. People born in different eras, raised in different economic circumstances, or exposed to different financial education will naturally develop different approaches to money. Housel illustrates this through the stark contrast between Ronald James Reed, a janitor who lived frugally and quietly amassed an $8 million fortune through long-term, disciplined investing, and Richard Fuscone, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive who declared bankruptcy despite his prestigious background and financial expertise. Their behaviors were shaped by their personal experiences, not their intelligence or education. The key takeaway isn't that one approach is universally better than another, but that we must recognize how our own financial worldview has been shaped by our unique experiences. This self-awareness is the first step toward making better money decisions. By understanding the invisible forces that drive our financial behaviors, we can begin to separate rational thinking from emotionally driven reactions. This chapter sets the tone for the entire book. Money decisions are rarely purely logical. They're influenced by our personal histories, emotions, and the unique ways we view the world. Recognizing this reality doesn't mean surrendering to irrationality. It means developing a more nuanced understanding of why we make the financial choices we do. Luck and risk, the unseen forces of financial success. Success with money is never purely the result of what you do. Luck and risk play enormous roles that often go unacknowledged. Housel argues that we systematically underestimate the impact of luck in success and the role of risk in failure, leading to dangerous misconceptions about how wealth is created and preserved. Bill Gates attended one of the few high schools in the world with a computer in 1968. Warren Buffett was born in the United States, where his investing genius could flourish in the world's most accommodating market. Both are undeniably talented, but their success also involved tremendous luck in their circumstances, facts often overlooked in their success stories. This understanding has profound implications. When we attribute all financial success to skill and all failure to poor decisions, we develop unrealistic expectations about what we can control. We might chase financial goals with strategies that worked for others without recognizing the role luck played in their outcomes, or the different risks we face in our own circumstances. Housel introduces the concept of silent risk, threats to financial well-being that aren't visible until they strike. History is filled with investors and businesses that appeared brilliant until sudden market shifts revealed the risks hidden in their strategies. The investors who survived the 1929 crash weren't necessarily the smartest. They were often those who had prepared for unforeseen risks. This insight leads to a powerful conclusion. The most important financial skill may not be getting rich, but staying rich. Building wealth means taking risks, but preserving wealth requires recognizing the role of luck and preparing for bad luck through humility and cautious optimism. The most sustainable financial strategies acknowledge that no amount of skill can eliminate the impact of luck and risk. By accepting the significant role of factors outside our control, we can focus on what we can control, saving diligently, avoiding catastrophic risks, and maintaining reasonable expectations. This balanced approach might not make for exciting financial media headlines, but it builds sustainable wealth over time. Never enough, the danger of moving goalposts. One of the most dangerous financial traps is the inability to know when enough is enough. Housel explores how the pursuit of more money, more status, more returns, can actually reduce long-term wealth and happiness when it drives people to take irrational risks. Bernie Madoff stands as the ultimate example. Already wealthy beyond most people's dreams, his desire for more led him to orchestrate a massive Ponzi scheme that eventually collapsed, destroying his reputation, freedom, and family relationships. He had more money than he could ever spend but still couldn't recognize when enough was enough. This phenomenon extends beyond extreme cases like Madoff. Many investors sabotage themselves by reaching for higher returns when conservative investments would meet all their actual needs. The desire to maximize every opportunity often leads to accepting unnecessary risks that jeopardize financial security that's already been achieved. Housel identifies 3 levels of financial well-being. 1. The ability to survive without worry about basic needs. 2. Comfort and freedom to enjoy life's pleasures. And 3. Sustaining wealth over the long term. The true danger comes when people achieve the first 2 levels but risk them in pursuit of unnecessary excess, often driven by social comparison rather than their actual needs. Social comparison plays a particularly destructive role in financial psychology. When wealth is measured relative to others rather than by one's own needs and values, there's never a point of satisfaction. This relative measurement creates a perpetual treadmill where enough is always just out of reach, no matter how much wealth is accumulated. The antidote to this trap is developing a clear definition of enough, based on personal values rather than external benchmarks. This definition becomes a protective barrier against the risks that come from perpetually moving financial goalposts. By recognizing when your financial needs are truly met, you can avoid the catastrophic risks that come from reaching for returns you don't actually need. This insight connects directly to happiness research, showing that satisfaction comes not from maximizing every opportunity, but from appreciating what you have and making peace with missing some opportunities. Financial success ultimately means having what you need without risking what matters most to you. Confounding compounding, the most powerful force in finance. Albert Einstein allegedly called compound interest the 8th wonder of the world, and Housel demonstrates why this mathematical phenomenon is so crucial yet so frequently misunderstood. The true power of compounding isn't in the numbers themselves, but in the patience required to let them work their magic. Warren Buffett is worth over $100 billion, but what's rarely mentioned is that over 96% of his wealth was accumulated after his 50th birthday, and 99% came after he turned 65. The real secret to Buffett's success isn't just his investment skill but his extraordinary patience. He has been investing steadily since age 10 and has enjoyed the benefits of compounding for over 80 years. This reality contradicts how most people think about building wealth. We focus on finding the highest possible returns or making brilliant financial moves, but the more powerful approach is often making reasonable financial decisions and allowing time to multiply their effects. Compounding works in silence, building wealth in ways that aren't immediately visible or exciting. Housel uses vivid examples to illustrate this principle. If you invest $1 at 20% annual returns for 30 years, you'll have $237, but extend that to 40 years, and you'll have $1,469, over 6 times as much. The additional decade doesn't add wealth, it multiplies it. This multiplication effect explains why patience is often rewarded more handsomely than brilliance in investing. The challenge is that humans aren't naturally wired to think in terms of exponential growth. We intuitively understand linear progress, adding the same amount repeatedly, but struggle to grasp how compounding accelerates over time, multiplying by an increasing amount. This cognitive limitation leads many investors to underestimate the long-term benefits of patient investing while overestimating the importance of short-term results. Perhaps most importantly, compounding applies beyond just investment returns. Reputation, knowledge, and relationships all compound over time. The consistent application of good habits, regular saving, ongoing education, nurturing professional relationships, creates exponential benefits that aren't immediately apparent but become powerful over decades. The lesson is clear. The most important element in compounding isn't the return rate but the time horizon. Even modest returns, if given enough time, will eventually outperform higher returns over shorter periods. This mathematical reality should shift our focus from maximizing short-term gains to extending our investment time horizons through patience and consistency. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. Different games with different rules. Building wealth and preserving wealth are fundamentally different challenges requiring different mindsets and strategies. Housel explains that getting wealthy often involves taking risks, being optimistic, and embracing the possibility of failure. Staying wealthy, however, requires humility, paranoia about what could go wrong, and a focus on financial survival. Jesse Livermore provides a cautionary tale. One of the greatest stock traders of the early 20th century, he made the equivalent of billions in today's dollars multiple times, only to repeatedly lose everything through excessive risk-taking. He understood how to get wealthy but never mastered the different skill of staying wealthy, eventually taking his own life after his third bankruptcy. Housel introduces a crucial framework. Financial success is not a hard science. It's a soft skill, where how you behave is more important than what you know. This perspective explains why some brilliant financial minds fail while more average thinkers succeed. Sustainable wealth depends on reasonable behavior maintained over time, not momentary brilliance. The preservation of wealth depends on avoiding catastrophic mistakes rather than maximizing every opportunity. This means maintaining a financial margin of safety through adequate savings, manageable debt levels, and reasonable lifestyle expectations. Room for error isn't just prudent, it's essential in a world where unforeseen risks can devastate even well-planned finances. Particularly important is the idea that wealth preservation requires saying, "I don't know," and "I don't need to know" about many financial questions. The most dangerous financial decisions often come from overconfidence, the belief that you can predict market movements or economic trends with certainty. Sustainable wealth requires accepting the limitations of your knowledge and avoiding bets that could be ruinous if wrong. Housel emphasizes that financial outcomes are determined not just by what happens, but by how you respond to what happens. Even the best financial plan will face unexpected challenges. The difference between sustaining wealth and losing it often comes down to whether you have the emotional resilience and financial flexibility to weather these challenges without making catastrophic decisions under pressure. This distinction between getting wealthy and staying wealthy reveals that many popularly celebrated financial practices, aggressive leverage, concentrated investments, market timing, may help some people get rich but typically undermine wealth preservation. The most sustainable path combines reasonable efforts to build wealth with equally serious attention to protecting what you've accumulated. Tails you win. The power of asymmetric outcomes. The distribution of financial returns is not even or predictable. It follows a power law where a small number of decisions or investments typically account for the majority of lifetime results. Housel explains that successful investing isn't about avoiding all mistakes, but ensuring you participate in the rare but powerful positive outliers that drive long-term returns. Venture capital provides the clearest example of this principle. Most venture investments fail completely, and in a typical successful fund, over 80% of the returns come from fewer than 20% of the investments. A venture capitalist who avoids all failures would likely miss the rare extraordinary successes that drive overall returns. Being right on most investments matters less than ensuring exposure to potential outlier successes. This insight applies to individual investors as well. A lifetime of investing will include many mistakes and mediocre decisions, but these may be completely overshadowed by a few excellent decisions that compound substantially over time. Amazon stock has increased over 1,000-fold since its IPO, meaning that a small investment at the right time could compensate for dozens of failed investment ideas. Housel argues that this reality should change how we think about diversification and investment strategy. Rather than trying to avoid all mistakes, impossible, or predict exactly which investments will succeed, equally impossible, the wiser approach is creating a portfolio that can survive your inevitable mistakes while maintaining exposure to potential outsized winners. This perspective leads to what might seem like contradictory advice. Be simultaneously humble about your ability to predict individual outcomes, but optimistic about the potential for positive surprises within a diversified approach. This balanced mindset recognizes both the frequency of disappointment and the life-changing potential of occasional extraordinary success. The lesson extends beyond investing to business and career decisions. Many successful entrepreneurs failed multiple times before finding their breakthrough opportunity. Many careers include multiple detours before discovering a path with outsized potential. In all these domains, sustaining enough attempts to encounter the positive outliers matters more than avoiding every mistake along the way. By understanding the asymmetric nature of financial outcomes, we can develop more realistic expectations about our inevitable failures, while maintaining the optimism and perseverance needed to participate in the rare but powerful successes that ultimately determine financial outcomes. Freedom, the highest form of wealth. True wealth isn't measured by dollars in an account, but by the freedom those dollars provide. Housel argues that the most valuable form of wealth is the ability to control your time and make choices based on what matters most to you, not what generates the highest financial return. This perspective transforms how we should think about financial goals. Rather than targeting specific dollar amounts, Housel suggests focusing on the control and flexibility money can provide. A person with $1 million who feels constantly compelled to maximize returns might be less wealthy in this sense than someone with $500,000 who has achieved the freedom to make work and lifestyle choices without financial stress. Rajat Gupta illustrates this principle through a cautionary tale. As the managing director of McKinsey and a board member at Goldman Sachs, he had achieved extraordinary financial success, tens of millions in net worth, multiple homes, and high social status. Yet he risked it all by passing insider information to a hedge fund manager, a decision that eventually led to his imprisonment. Despite his enormous financial resources, he hadn't achieved the sense of enough that represents true wealth. The freedom-centered definition of wealth leads to practical advice about career and earning decisions. Taking a lower-paying job that offers more control over your time might actually make you wealthier in the most meaningful sense. Building a smaller business that you control completely could represent greater wealth than a larger enterprise that controls you through constant demands and stress. This perspective also explains why saving money matters regardless of the interest rate it earns. Savings provide options and flexibility that represent wealth in the form of freedom, even if those savings aren't maximizing potential investment returns. The security of knowing you can withstand financial setbacks without disrupting your life is a profound form of wealth that balance sheets don't fully capture. Housel suggests that we should measure financial success not by bank account balances or investment returns, but by asking, is the life I'm able to live with my current resources aligned with my values and priorities? When money decisions support meaningful freedom rather than just accumulation, they contribute to wealth in its most valuable form. This freedom-centered understanding of wealth has profound implications for financial planning. It shifts the focus from maximizing every dollar to creating a financial life that enables meaningful choices. The highest dividend money pays isn't measured in dollars, but in the ability to wake up every day with the freedom to make decisions based on your values rather than financial necessity. Man in the car paradox: when money fails to buy happiness. We often pursue wealth believing it will bring admiration and respect from others, but Housel explains the man in the car paradox. People don't actually admire the person driving an expensive car. They imagine themselves driving the car. This misunderstanding leads to disappointment when purchasing status symbols fails to deliver the social rewards we expect. This paradox reveals a fundamental truth about the social aspects of wealth. Visible displays of money are rarely as socially rewarding as we anticipate. The Ferrari driver might believe others are admiring him, when in reality, observers are thinking about themselves in his position. This mismatch between expectation and reality helps explain why many wealthy people report that material acquisitions deliver less satisfaction than anticipated. The pursuit of social status through money creates a particularly dangerous trap because status is inherently relative and therefore insatiable. No matter how much you accumulate, there will always be someone with more. This comparative measurement creates a perpetual sense of inadequacy that undermines the happiness wealth could otherwise provide. Housel suggests that money is most effective at buying happiness when it helps you control your time, reduces worry about adversity, and enables meaningful experiences and relationships. These benefits typically come from financial security and reasonable comfort, not from status-oriented spending designed to impress others who are actually focused on themselves. This insight doesn't mean abandoning all luxury or pleasure spending. Rather, it suggests approaching such purchases with realistic expectations about the happiness they'll deliver. A luxury purchase made with full awareness that it's for personal enjoyment rather than social approval is more likely to provide lasting satisfaction. The paradox reveals the importance of introspection about financial goals. When we pursue wealth primarily for its impression on others, we're likely to be disappointed. When we pursue it for the freedom, security, and capabilities it provides to live according to our values, we're more likely to find genuine satisfaction. This understanding can transform spending decisions. Instead of allocating resources toward impressing others who may not even notice, we can direct them toward the areas research consistently shows actually improve well-being. Time with loved ones, memorable experiences, relief from financial stress, and the flexibility to align daily life with personal values. Wealth is what you don't see, the invisible nature of financial success. We tend to define wealth by what people visibly spend, but Housel argues that true wealth is actually what you don't see, the money not spent, quietly working and compounding out of view. This invisible nature of wealth creates dangerous social misperceptions about how financial success is actually achieved. The person driving the $100,000 car might appear wealthy, but the financially secure person who saved and invested rather than buying an expensive vehicle reveals no visible signs of their wealth. This invisibility means that we're constantly exposed to misleading evidence about what financial success looks like and how it's achieved. This dynamic creates what Housel calls luxury theater, spending designed to signal wealth that often undermines the building of actual wealth. When people emulate the visible spending of others, without seeing the invisible savings rate or income sources that might support that spending, They adopt financially destructive behaviors based on incomplete information. The paradox deepens because the most impressive displays of wealth, expensive cars, luxury clothing, lavish homes, are often signs of someone prioritizing visible consumption over building invisible wealth. Meanwhile, those most successfully building wealth often provide few visible signs of their financial success precisely because saving and investing, by definition, means choosing not to display wealth through consumption. Housel emphasizes that wealth is the money not spent. Wealth is an option not yet taken to buy something later. Its value lies in offering you options, flexibility, and growth to one day purchase more stuff than you could right now. This definition shifts focus from current consumption to the future possibilities that saved and invested resources create. This understanding transforms how we should think about impressive displays of wealth. The expensive car, the luxury vacation photos on social media, the lavish lifestyle, all might actually signal the absence of wealth rather than its presence if they represent spending that prevents saving and investing. True wealth accumulation happens away from public view, making its visible absence ironically more indicative of its actual presence. For practical financial planning, this means recognizing that building wealth often requires comfort with relative invisibility. The financial choices that build sustainable wealth, high savings rates, reasonable consumption, long-term investing, typically don't generate social recognition or status. Accepting this reality is essential for making decisions that build actual wealth rather than its appearance. Save money, the highest return you'll get. Saving money has unfashionable associations with sacrifice and scarcity, but Housel argues it's actually the foundation of financial freedom, and possibly the highest return financial decision available to most people. This counterintuitive insight comes from understanding savings as the purchasing of options and flexibility rather than the deferral of happiness. The primary benefit of saving isn't the numerical return on the money itself, but the intangible return of having options that wouldn't otherwise exist. When you save, you gain the ability to wait for better investment opportunities, change careers without immediate financial pressure, weather unexpected expenses without crisis, or take advantage of opportunities that require capital. These options can generate returns, financial and psychological, far exceeding typical investment yields. Housel introduces a powerful reframing: the ability to do what you want when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want, is priceless. It is the highest dividend money pays. This perspective transforms saving from a dreary sacrifice into the purchasing of meaningful freedom and possibility. This approach also resolves the apparent contradiction between enjoying life today and preparing for tomorrow. By viewing savings as buying options rather than deferring happiness, we recognize that the security and flexibility savings provide can actually increase present happiness by reducing financial stress and creating confidence about future capabilities. The ideal savings rate isn't universal, but depends on individual priorities and circumstances. However, Housel suggests that many people underestimate the options and flexibility that generous saving creates. He notes that maintaining a high savings rate might actually matter more than the specific investment returns those savings generate, particularly in the early stages of wealth building. Critically, saving effectively doesn't require exceptional income. Research consistently shows that many high-income professionals save less of their income than some middle-class households. Financial security depends more on savings rate than absolute income level, making this approach accessible regardless of earnings. This perspective also helps explain why some high-income individuals still experience financial stress. Without adequate savings providing flexibility and options, even substantial incomes can leave people vulnerable to financial setbacks and dependent on continuing that income regardless of personal cost. True financial freedom requires saving regardless of income level. By understanding savings as the purchase of freedom rather than the deferral of happiness, we can develop healthier and more sustainable approaches to balancing present enjoyment with future security. Reasonable rational. Why psychology trumps math in personal finance. Financial decisions should theoretically be made through rational analysis, but Housel explains why reasonable decisions that acknowledge human psychology often prove more successful than mathematically optimal choices that people can't actually stick with. This insight transforms how we should approach financial planning. A mathematically optimal investment strategy only works if you can actually follow it through market turbulence, economic uncertainty, and personal challenges. Housel argues that the historical odds of making money in U.S. markets are 50-50 over one-day periods, 68% in one-year periods, 88% in 10-year periods, and 100% in 20-year periods. Anything that keeps you in the game long enough for these odds to work in your favor is reasonable. This perspective explains why apparently suboptimal financial choices, keeping more cash than models recommend, diversifying more than mathematics suggests, or accepting lower expected returns for psychological comfort, often lead to better long-term outcomes. These mistakes are actually reasonable accommodations to human psychology that enable consistent long-term investing. Housel provides the example of dollar-cost averaging, investing a fixed amount at regular intervals rather than in a lump sum when funds become available. While mathematically inferior to immediate lump sum investing given typical market upward trends, dollar-cost averaging provides psychological comfort that helps many investors stay consistently invested through market volatility. The mathematically wrong approach may yield better results by accounting for actual human behavior. This distinction between reasonable and rational applies broadly across financial decisions. Low-fee index investing isn't necessarily mathematically optimal compared to strategies that might generate higher theoretical returns, but its simplicity and consistency make it reasonable for most investors. Similarly, paying off low-interest debt when investments might yield higher returns can be reasonable because of the psychological benefits of debt reduction. Embracing the reasonable over the rational requires honest self-assessment about your psychological tendencies. How have you responded to previous market downturns? What financial strategies have you been able to maintain consistently? What approaches to money reduce your stress and enable good decisions under pressure? Answering these questions often matters more than calculating optimal mathematical solutions. Financial success ultimately depends not on identifying theoretically perfect approaches, but on finding strategies you can actually follow consistently through various market conditions and life circumstances. A reasonable plan you can stick with will typically outperform a rational plan you abandon when its psychological demands prove unsustainable. Surprise: the unpredictable nature of financial history. History provides our primary guide for making financial decisions, but Housel explains why financial history is defined by surprises that, by definition, couldn't have been predicted using historical data. This reality requires fundamentally rethinking how we use historical information to guide financial planning. The 20th century included the Great Depression, 2 world wars, the rise of suburbia, women entering the workforce, the Cold War, the Internet revolution, and numerous other developments that dramatically affected financial outcomes. None of these world-shaping events could have been predicted with confidence before they occurred, yet each fundamentally altered the financial landscape. This observation leads to a powerful insight. The most important financial events can't be predicted from historical patterns precisely because they haven't happened before. The truly transformative developments, technological revolutions, geopolitical realignments, social movements, create discontinuities that historical data couldn't have anticipated. Housel illustrates this through the 2008 financial crisis. The crisis wasn't just a random fluctuation, but reflected how complex, adaptive financial systems create outcomes that couldn't be anticipated even with perfect historical data. The innovations of mortgage securitization created risks that history couldn't have predicted because these specific financial structures hadn't existed previously. This unpredictability doesn't mean historical analysis is worthless. Rather, it suggests we should use history to understand the range of possibilities and the general principles of human behavior, not to make specific predictions about future outcomes. History teaches us that markets fluctuate, human psychology drives booms and busts, and resilient financial systems survive even dramatic setbacks, principles that remain relevant despite changing circumstances. The practical implication is that financial plans must incorporate resilience to unpredictable developments rather than optimizing for specific anticipated outcomes. Diversification, flexibility, reasonable debt levels, and adequate savings create financial systems that can survive the inevitable surprises that history doesn't prepare us for. Housel suggests focusing on things that never change amid constant surprises, human reactions to fear and greed, the benefits of compounding, the value of room for error. These principles remain relevant even as specific circumstances constantly shift in unpredictable ways. This perspective promotes humility about financial predictions. Rather than believing we can anticipate specific developments, we should acknowledge the inherent unpredictability of complex systems and build financial approaches that can adapt to the inevitable surprises that history promises but doesn't specifically predict. Room for error, the underappreciated necessity of financial slack. Housel argues that creating room for error, financial slack that allows for mistakes and unexpected developments, isn't just prudent but essential in a world where uncertainty is inevitable and forecasts are frequently wrong. This buffer creates resilience that proves more valuable than theoretical optimization. The future contains too many unknowns to be precisely predicted, making some level of error inevitable in any financial plan. Room for error acknowledges this reality by building in safeguards against mistakes rather than assuming perfect foresight. This might include holding more cash than models suggest is optimal, maintaining multiple income sources, keeping debt levels manageable, or diversifying investments beyond what mathematical optimization would recommend. Housel explains that room for error provides three crucial benefits. First, it prevents catastrophic failures that can permanently derail financial progress. Second, it creates psychological security that enables better decision-making during volatile periods. Third, it provides the flexibility to take advantage of unexpected opportunities that inevitably arise. The concept applies across multiple financial domains. In investing, room for error might mean holding bonds despite their lower expected returns because they provide stability during market downturns. In career planning, it might mean developing multiple skills rather than optimizing for a single specialization. In household finances, it might mean maintaining emergency savings despite the opportunity cost of having cash not invested in higher-yielding assets. Particularly important is Housel's insight that room for error isn't just about financial safety, but about psychological endurance. Many theoretically optimal financial strategies fail not because of mathematical flaws, but because humans can't endure their psychological demands during periods of stress. Buffering against these psychological breaking points is as important as protecting against financial shortfalls. The concept extends to how we evaluate financial advice and opportunities. Housel suggests that investment opportunities often emphasize potential returns while underplaying potential risks, creating a skewed perception of possible outcomes. Building room for error means mentally adjusting these presentations to account for the likelihood that reality will prove less favorable than optimistic projections suggest. This approach isn't about pessimism but realism, acknowledging that things will go wrong and building financial systems robust enough to withstand inevitable setbacks. The goal isn't to prevent all mistakes, but to ensure that the mistakes you inevitably make don't prove financially fatal. By incorporating appropriate room for error, you transform uncertainty from a threat into a manageable reality. This psychological shift creates both financial resilience and emotional well-being, a combination that supports better financial decision-making and long-term wealth building. You'll change the overlooked evolution of financial goals. We consistently underestimate how much our values, goals, and priorities will change over time, leading to financial decisions that fail to accommodate our evolving selves. Housel explains why building flexibility into financial plans matters more than optimizing for specific goals that may become irrelevant as we change. Our tendency to assume our current preferences will persist into the future, what psychologists call the end of history illusion, leads to rigid financial decisions that don't serve our future selves. The 25-year-old saving for retirement may have completely different values and priorities by age 65, making highly specific retirement planning potentially misaligned with future needs. This insight doesn't suggest abandoning long-term planning, but adapting it to accommodate inevitable personal evolution. Rather than creating detailed visions of specific future circumstances, Housel recommends building financial flexibility that can support whatever values and goals emerge as we change over decades. Practical applications of this perspective include prioritizing liquid assets that can be redirected as goals change, rather than locking all resources in toy-liquid investments tied to specific visions of the future. Maintaining reasonable lifestyle expectations that create financial flexibility, rather than building consumption patterns that require specific income streams. Recognizing that career aspirations, family goals, geographic preferences, and even risk tolerance will likely evolve significantly over time. Perhaps most importantly, this perspective suggests we should make peace with the financial mistakes that result from changing preferences. The house that no longer suits your needs or the career investment in a field you've lost passion for aren't necessarily planning failures. They're often simply reflections of your evolution as a person. Housel connects this insight to the value of maintaining reasonable financial freedom, rather than optimizing for specific future scenarios. By preserving flexibility and avoiding financial commitments that assume unchanging preferences, you create space for your future self to pursue whatever values and goals emerge through life experience. This approach doesn't mean avoiding commitment entirely, but making commitments with the awareness that your future self may have different priorities. Long-term investing remains valuable not because your specific vision of retirement will remain unchanged, but because financial resources will serve whatever vision eventually emerges. Understanding your own evolution can transform financial regrets into valuable insights. Rather than viewing past financial decisions that no longer align with your current values as mistakes, you can see them as appropriate responses to who you were then, and use that understanding to build more flexibility for whoever you might become next. Nothing's free. Everything has a price beyond money. Every financial decision carries costs beyond the monetary price tag, costs that are often invisible but crucial to sustainable financial success. Housel explains why acknowledging and accepting these hidden prices is essential for making decisions that align with your true priorities. Investment returns provide the clearest example of these hidden costs. Higher returns typically require accepting higher volatility, longer time horizons, higher stress levels, or some combination of these non-monetary prices. The price of high stock returns isn't just the dollar cost of purchasing shares, but the psychological cost of enduring significant market fluctuations and the opportunity cost of tying up capital for long periods. Housel argues that many financial mistakes stem from attempting to eliminate these inherent costs, rather than accepting them as necessary components of the desired benefit. Investors frequently try to achieve high returns without volatility, career success without stress, or financial security without saving, all attempts to get the benefit without paying the associated psychological price. Understanding the true price of financial goals transforms decision-making. Instead of seeking ways to circumvent necessary costs, which often leads to expensive mistakes, you can make deliberate decisions about which costs you're willing to pay based on your values and circumstances. For example, the price of index fund investing includes accepting that your returns will never dramatically outperform the market. The price of entrepreneurship includes accepting income uncertainty and potential failure. The price of early retirement includes accepting lifestyle constraints during working years. None of these prices is inherently good or bad. What matters is whether you're willing to pay the specific price required for your chosen goal. This perspective also helps explain why people make different financial choices despite having access to the same information. They aren't necessarily making mathematical errors, but choosing to pay different psychological prices based on their personal preferences and circumstances. The risk-averse investor accepting lower returns for psychological comfort isn't making a mistake. They're consciously choosing which price they're willing to pay. Particularly valuable is Housel's insight that sustainable financial strategies require accepting prices you can actually pay over the long term. A theoretically optimal investment strategy that demands more psychological fortitude than you possess will ultimately fail, regardless of its mathematical merits. The sustainable approach acknowledges your personal limitations and preferences rather than assuming an idealized investor personality. By recognizing and accepting the full price of financial choices, monetary, psychological, and temporal, you can make decisions aligned with your true priorities rather than pursuing benefits while attempting to avoid their necessary costs. You and me, the role of pessimism and optimism in financial success. Successful financial behavior requires a seemingly contradictory combination of pessimism about short-term difficulties and optimism about long-term possibilities. Housel explains why this cognitive balance, pessimistic enough to prepare for problems but optimistic enough to benefit from long-term growth, creates sustainable financial success. Short-term pessimism means expecting and preparing for market downturns, economic recessions, personal financial setbacks, and other inevitable challenges. This pessimism isn't paralyzing but practical. It creates the saving habits, emergency funds, reasonable debt levels, and diversified investments that enable resilience when difficulties emerge. Long-term optimism means maintaining faith that human ingenuity, economic growth, and well-structured financial markets will create prosperity over extended periods despite short-term disruptions. This optimism provides the patience and perseverance to remain invested through difficult periods, allowing participation in the long-term growth that historically rewards disciplined investors. Housel illustrates this balance through historical examples. The Great Depression created a generation of savers who prepared for adversity, constructive pessimism, but also invested in America's future through war bonds and later stock market participation, sustainable optimism. Their financial success stemmed not from either extreme, but from balancing reasonable caution with long-term confidence. This balanced perspective contrasts with common but dangerous financial tendencies. Persistent pessimists who expect economic collapse may preserve capital through extreme caution, but miss the enormous long-term growth that comes from staying invested in productive assets. Relentless optimists who dismiss the possibility of setbacks may achieve high returns during good periods, but lack the resilience to survive inevitable downturns. The cognitive challenge is maintaining both perspectives simultaneously rather than oscillating between extremes. This requires developing what Housel calls reasonable optimism, confidence in long-term progress that acknowledges and prepares for intermittent setbacks. This balanced mindset creates both the protection to survive difficulties and the participation needed to build wealth over time. Housel connects this balance to the concept of financial stories, the narratives we tell ourselves about how money works and what financial success looks like. The most useful financial stories incorporate both caution about short-term risks and confidence in long-term possibilities, creating mental frameworks that support sustainable financial behavior. This balanced perspective has practical implications for financial planning. It suggests maintaining emergency funds and reasonable debt levels, pessimism about short-term risks, while still investing substantially in growth assets like stocks, optimism about long-term progress. It means preparing for personal financial challenges while maintaining confidence in your long-term financial journey. Perhaps most importantly, this balance creates psychological sustainability. Financial approaches based on persistent pessimism often create stress and anxiety that prove emotionally unsustainable. Approaches based on unchecked optimism create vulnerability to disappointment and panic during inevitable downturns. The balanced approach creates both emotional resilience and long-term financial growth. By cultivating short-term pessimism and long-term optimism in appropriate measures, you develop a financial mindset that matches the actual pattern of economic and market reality, regular challenges and setbacks within a broader trajectory of growth and progress. The seduction of pessimism, why negativity sounds smarter. Financial commentary tends to reward pessimism with attention and admiration, creating a dangerous bias toward negative perspectives. Housel explains why we're naturally drawn to pessimistic financial views despite optimism typically proving more accurate over time. Pessimistic financial forecasts sound intellectually serious in ways that optimistic ones don't. The analyst predicting market collapse seems thoughtful and prudent, while the one expecting continued growth may seem naive or complacent. This perception persists despite the historical record showing that long-term optimism about markets and economies has consistently outperformed pessimism as a factual position. This paradox emerges from several psychological factors. First, pessimism seems like protective action, while optimism feels like vulnerable passivity. We instinctively value warnings about danger more than reassurances about opportunity, a tendency that served our ancestors well in avoiding predators, but misleads us in financial contexts where long-term growth has been the dominant reality. Second, pessimism often unfolds dramatically while optimism develops gradually. Market crashes happen suddenly with clear causation and narrative appeal. Market growth typically happens incrementally over extended periods without dramatic storylines. This difference makes pessimistic events more memorable and reportable despite being less impactful than the cumulative effect of optimistic trends. Third, financial pessimism creates the perception of insider knowledge. The pessimist seems to possess special insight about hidden dangers, while the optimist appears to be simply accepting conventional wisdom. This perception persists despite the fact that accurate recognition of long-term growth trends requires resisting the constant temptation of attractive but ultimately incorrect pessimistic narratives. These dynamics create what Housel calls an intellectual asymmetry. Pessimism sounds smarter, feels more urgent, appears more prudent, and gains more attention despite optimism being the more accurate position based on financial history. This asymmetry explains why financial media amplifies pessimistic voices, and why even successful investors often frame their thinking in terms of dangers rather than opportunities. The practical implication isn't adopting blind optimism, but recognizing and adjusting for our natural bias toward pessimistic perspectives. Being aware that pessimism will always sound more intellectually compelling allows you to evaluate financial information more objectively, potentially identifying opportunities that others miss due to attractive but misguided negative narratives. This awareness also explains why maintaining optimistic positioning often feels uncomfortable even when objectively justified by historical evidence. The discomfort doesn't indicate error, but reflects the natural psychological pull of pessimism that successful long-term investors learn to recognize and resist when appropriate. When you'll believe anything, narrative fallacies in finance. Human minds naturally create stories to explain complex realities, but Housel reveals how these stories can lead us dangerously astray in financial contexts where randomness, luck, and complexity defy simple narratives. Understanding these narrative fallacies is essential for avoiding costly financial mistakes driven by compelling but misleading stories. We crave stories that offer clear cause and effect explanations for financial outcomes. When the stock market rises or falls, we immediately seek narratives explaining why, even when movements may largely reflect random fluctuations rather than identifiable causes. These narratives create an illusion of understanding and predictability in domains where genuine uncertainty dominates. Housel identifies several ways these narrative fallacies distort financial thinking. First, we underestimate the role of luck and randomness because they make for unsatisfying stories. A successful investor attributing their performance to a specific strategy creates a more compelling narrative than acknowledging the significant role of fortunate timing or circumstances. This leads to dangerous overconfidence in strategies that may have succeeded partly through luck rather than replicable skill. Second, we create simple explanations for complex phenomena because complexity makes for poor storytelling. Financial markets involve millions of participants making decisions influenced by countless factors, yet we explain market movements with singular causes like investors reacted to the Federal Reserve announcement. These simplifications create false confidence in our understanding of financial dynamics. Third, we construct narratives that flatter our self-image rather than accurately reflecting reality. Investors typically attribute successful investments to their skills and unsuccessful ones to external factors beyond their control. This self-serving narrative protects our egos but prevents learning from mistakes and recognizing the limits of our abilities. Fourth, we readily accept narratives that confirm our existing beliefs while scrutinizing those that challenge them. An investor who believes inflation is imminent will eagerly embrace stories supporting that view while finding reasons to discount contradictory evidence. This confirmation bias strengthens our commitment to potentially flawed narratives rather than adjusting them based on new information. The solution isn't abandoning narratives entirely. Our minds naturally think in stories, but developing greater awareness of their limitations. Housel recommends maintaining humility about financial explanations, considering multiple potential narratives for any outcome, explicitly acknowledging the role of luck, and recognizing when uncertainty makes confident explanation impossible. Particularly valuable is Housel's suggestion to focus on process rather than outcomes when evaluating financial decisions. A sound decision process may sometimes yield poor outcomes due to bad luck, while flawed processes may occasionally succeed through good fortune. Evaluating the decision-making process itself, rather than just the resulting narrative of success or failure, provides more reliable feedback for improving financial choices. By recognizing the seductive pull of simple, satisfying financial narratives while maintaining awareness of their limitations, you can avoid costly mistakes driven by compelling stories that don't actually reflect financial reality. Altogether now, the psychology of building wealth. In the culmination of his framework, Housel synthesizes these psychological insights into practical principles for building and maintaining wealth. These principles don't require exceptional mathematical ability or market insight, but rather psychological attributes that enable sustainable financial behavior. The foundation of wealth building isn't brilliance but behavioral consistency. Reasonable financial decisions maintained with discipline over long periods typically outperform intermittent brilliance undermined by psychological biases. This reality makes self-awareness and psychological management more important than technical financial knowledge for most people's financial success. Housel outlines several specific behavioral principles that support sustainable wealth building. First, define enough before financial success pulls you toward excess. Having a clear vision of what constitutes financial success for you, whether measured in savings, income, or specific life goals, creates a protective barrier against the risk escalation that often accompanies increased wealth. This definition should reflect your actual values rather than social comparison or abstract financial targets. Second, save more than seems reasonable to create both financial safety and psychological freedom. Generous saving provides protection against inevitable setbacks while creating flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances and seize unexpected opportunities. This approach acknowledges the unpredictability of both financial markets and personal life trajectories. Third, expect and accept volatility and disappointment as necessary components of financial growth. Rather than reacting with surprise or panic to market downturns, recognize them as inevitable features of a system that generates substantial long-term growth despite short-term instability. This acceptance transforms predictable market fluctuations from psychological emergencies into anticipated and manageable events. Fourth, avoid the extreme ends of financial planning. The mathematically optimal investment approach is often psychologically unsustainable, while the most comfortable approach may be financially inadequate. Finding the middle ground, where financial mathematics and psychological reality meet, creates sustainable plans that can be maintained through varying conditions. Fifth, recognize that financial goals and desires will change over time, requiring flexibility rather than rigid adherence to previous plans. Maintaining liquid savings and reasonable lifestyle expectations creates the adaptability to accommodate your evolving self rather than locking you into financial commitments based on outdated versions of your priorities. Sixth, respect the role of luck without depending on it. While luck significantly influences financial outcomes, sustainable wealth building requires focusing on the factors within your control, saving diligently, investing consistently, and avoiding catastrophic mistakes, while accepting that some outcomes remain beyond your influence regardless of your decisions. Seventh, maintain a reasonable balance between optimism about long-term growth and pessimism about short-term challenges. This cognitive equilibrium creates both the resilience to endure inevitable setbacks and the patient participation needed to benefit from long-term economic expansion and market appreciation. These principles work together to create what Housel calls the psychology of money, a mindset that aligns with both financial mathematics and human psychological reality. This alignment enables sustainable financial behaviors that build wealth over time without requiring unrealistic psychological demands or exceptional mathematical sophistication. By focusing on these behavioral principles rather than technical financial details, Housel suggests most people can achieve financial success through reasonable savings habits, consistent investing in diversified assets, and psychological management that prevents catastrophic mistakes during periods of market stress or personal challenge. Confessions, applying the principles. In the final section of the book, Housel shares his personal approach to money, demonstrating how these psychological principles can be applied in practice. This transparent look at one financial professional's actual behavior provides a revealing case study in translating psychological insights into practical financial decisions. Housel approaches investing with what might seem like contradictory principles, maintaining high confidence that the market will provide good long-term returns, while simultaneously acknowledging that he has no idea what will happen in the short term. This balance of long-term optimism and short-term humility shapes his entire financial approach. His portfolio reflects this psychology. He keeps a substantial portion of his assets, 20%, in cash despite its poor investment returns, because the psychological freedom it provides enables him to remain calmly invested with his remaining assets even during market turbulence. This cash allocation isn't mathematically optimal, but creates psychological sustainability that enhances his overall financial outcomes. For his investment portfolio, Housel opts for extreme simplicity, primarily low-cost index funds rather than complex strategies requiring ongoing monitoring and adjustment. This approach acknowledges both the difficulty of outperforming markets through active management and the psychological benefit of simplicity in maintaining consistent behavioral discipline. Perhaps most revealing is Housel's focus on financial independence rather than maximizing potential wealth. He prioritizes maintaining work he intrinsically enjoys at a sustainable pace rather than maximizing income through more lucrative but potentially less satisfying opportunities. This approach reflects his definition of wealth as options and flexibility rather than merely accumulated dollars. His spending decisions similarly reflect psychological awareness. Rather than optimizing every expense, he spends generously in categories that bring genuine happiness while remaining frugal in areas with minimal happiness impact. This selective, values-based approach to spending creates sustainable satisfaction without the lifestyle inflation that often undermines wealth building. Housel explicitly acknowledges the role of luck in his financial journey, from being born in a prosperous country to entering the workforce during a historic bull market. This acknowledgement creates both appropriate humility about his success and recognition that others facing different circumstances may require different approaches despite similar psychological principles. Perhaps most importantly, Housel maintains an evolving relationship with money rather than rigid adherence to unchanging principles. As his life circumstances and priorities change, his financial approach adapts while maintaining core psychological foundations that support sustainable financial behavior across varying conditions. This practical demonstration of financial psychology in action reinforces the book's central premise. Financial success depends less on mathematical optimization or market prediction than on developing sustainable financial behaviors aligned with both objective financial principles and subjective psychological realities. Conclusion: the psychology behind financial freedom. The psychology of money ultimately reveals that financial success isn't primarily about technical knowledge, but about behavior sustained over time. Understanding market history and investment mathematics matters, but managing your psychology often determines whether that knowledge translates into actual financial well-being. The most powerful financial planning acknowledges both mathematical reality and psychological tendencies, rather than assuming perfectly rational behavior. Saving more than strictly necessary, diversifying more extensively than mathematically optimal, and maintaining financial flexibility beyond model recommendations often create better real-world outcomes by accommodating the psychological realities of human decision-making. Financial freedom emerges not from perfectly optimized portfolios, but from developing reasonable financial habits that can be consistently maintained through market cycles, economic changes, and personal life transitions. These habits include generous saving, patient investing, defining enough to prevent dangerous risk escalation, and maintaining appropriate cash reserves to enable psychological comfort during market volatility. The highest form of wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the freedom those dollars provide, the ability to make life choices based on personal values rather than financial necessity. This perspective transforms financial planning from mathematical optimization toward creating the flexibility and options that constitute genuine wealth in its most meaningful form. Perhaps most importantly, sustainable financial success requires self-awareness, understanding your own tendencies, defining personal measures of enough, recognizing your actual risk tolerance, and acknowledging how your financial perspectives have been shaped by your unique experiences. This self-knowledge enables financial approaches tailored to your psychological reality rather than theoretical ideals. The truly wealthy person isn't necessarily the one with the highest net worth, but the one who has shaped their financial life to support their personal values and priorities. Financial decisions ultimately serve larger life purposes, and aligning money management with these deeper purposes creates both financial success and genuine life satisfaction. If you found this exploration of money psychology valuable, please support our channel by liking this video, subscribing for more in-depth book summaries, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Which psychological principle resonated most with your own financial experience? Has understanding these psychological factors changed how you think about your financial decisions? Join the conversation and continue developing your own relationship with money. Remember, you can purchase Morgan Housel's complete work through the link in the description below. Until next time, may your financial decisions be shaped by wisdom rather than just mathematics, creating true wealth in its most meaningful form.